And we're now going to talk about this report that's come out from the co-op about the incidence of crime going up. Essentially, the business reported that there were more than 175,000 incidents from January to June this year alone. It's called on police forces to do more to target repeat offenders. Crime, shoplifting and antisocial behaviour has increased by over a third in co-op shops. In the past year, the company has revealed that almost 1,000 incidents occurred every day in shops in the first 6 months of 2023. I mean, that is a huge amount, isn't it? One shop in inner London was looted 3 times in a single day. Shop workers have been subject to physical assaults. That's increased by almost a third year on year, with antisocial behaviour and verbal abuse also increasing by a fifth. Co-op has warned the level of crime is out of control and could see some locations become no-go areas for convenience shops. What on earth is going on that we've got to the stage now in Britain that you've got instances of crime in your little local grocery store that essentially are threatening the people who work there, and people just ransacking joints with impunity? I want to know your opinion on this. Have you seen an uptick in crime on your high street, at your local shop? Is it just co-op or is it going on everywhere? And what is behind this? Is it that the police are not putting enough bobbies on the beat? Is it that perhaps there's such a backlog in our courts that no one's being brought to justice? Or is there something else at play here, some social dynamic that we're not talking about? Perhaps we're importing some pretty unsavoury ideologies from America, with people looking on social media and seeing the sort of scenes taking place in big cities such as San Francisco, with essentially people walking into any old shop they want, snatching whatever they want off the shelves, filming themselves doing it and walking out. Well, to discuss all of this, we're now going to speak to the one and only Andy Ngo, once American citizen, now here in the UK, who has written a brilliant book on the subject of Antifa and can no doubt shed some light on the increase in lawlessness across the Atlantic and tell us whether he thinks the same thing is happening over here. Andy, great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, so what do you think is going on? I know you're not necessarily familiar with what is going on, particularly with the co-op, but it seems to me they're painting a pretty dire picture of increasing looting, shoplifting, verbal abuse, and essentially a lot of people getting away with it, to the extent that certain locations they're beginning to regard as no-go areas to set up grocery stores. It's not the sort of thing we've really seen in the UK before, to my knowledge, but this is something that has happened a lot in America over recent years.
I think the warnings and requests for help from co-op should not be ignored. Many of the issues that Britain experienced socially, the US experiences on a more acute scale, and organized theft rings and shoplifting is one of them. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and there have been a number of businesses, even big ones, that have been impacted, like Walmart. Earlier this year, Walmart supercenters in Portland announced that all of them would close. That has huge impact on communities because it doesn't affect upper middle class or upper class communities. What it affects are low income working class communities. It leads to food deserts. It leads to also a culture where petty crime proliferates. I was also just in San Francisco. San Francisco is where the location for the most shoplifted Walgreens, which is similar to Boots, is in the United States. And there, when you go in, you'll see ice cream, crisps, and other snacks under lock and key because of the shoplifting. And that just creates an environment where thugs and criminals and even organized gangs feel empowered to commit these crimes. So whilst in the UK, some of these incidents may be isolated to some rather shocking violent incidents, but nonetheless, they don't just stay as isolated incidents.
But what are the driving factors behind this? Is it that policing has come under a huge amount of fire in the States, with calls to defund the police, this sense that the police are discriminating against certain communities? Is it being driven perhaps by social media, this sort of sense of anarchy and lawlessness, where people looking at what other people are doing online feel emboldened to go and commit crimes that never before they would have deemed thinkable or possible to get away with? Or is it, I mean, there'll be a psychologists out there, of course, saying that, well, no, people have to go and do these things because of the massive wealth gap in society. When people can't feed their kids, what do you expect them to do? Is this being planted in people's minds to create an uptick in anarchy, perhaps in the West, by influencing communities on social media to go out and perpetrate copycat crime? But what do you think is the root cause of these problems?
I don't think there's necessarily a political motivation behind the reasoning for the criminals themselves, but those who excuse it in the chattering classes, in the newspapers, on television, the commentators, often they do have a political ideology, which is to say that these are acts of reparations, or that it's a response by communities who are just hungry. But in many of the viral videos that have occurred in the US, the shoplifting rings and gangs are not targeting local grocery stores. They're going after the Gucci's, the Fendi's, and the designer shopping stores, such as in San Francisco and in many other American cities, where you see groups of usually youths going in and very quickly just grabbing all the luxury designer merchandise. And this leads to, well, to answer your question, there are a number of variables that are causing this, all of this phenomenon of just looting, shoplifting, thefts that are quite brazen. Well, one, it's a resourcing issue from law enforcement. Some of that stems from the whole defund the police movement that occurred in 2020. There's still really long-lasting consequences for that, because even though whilst police departments may have been refunded because that was unpopular with citizens, some places like Portland, Oregon, and Seattle and other cities are struggling with recruitment and hiring because police don't want to go and work in cities where there's such an anti-police bias. Another issue is just a matter of how law enforcement prioritizes crime. In cities like New York and others that I've mentioned, they've experienced a surge in homicides from 2020 going onward. So for them, they're not going to prioritize investigating looting and shoplifting. Those are much lower priority. And I think based on the reporting I read in the UK, that's a similar issue that's being experienced, that police are not prioritizing what's happening in some of these working class communities when the co-ops are being shoplifted.
I'm glad you said that, Andy, because actually in the Times newspaper today, in fact, police forces are promising to investigate every crime after years of overlooking lower-level offences such as criminal damage, shoplifting, car and bike theft. Ministers want police to dramatically improve their rates for solving many offences that have been virtually decriminalised and blight communities. I want to know your thoughts on this. Do you think there is growing lawlessness in the UK? What have you seen? What have you witnessed? And what do you think is the driving force behind it? Do please call in on this. And I'm fascinated to get a range of opinions on this from around the country. 0344 499 1000, or of course message talk plus your message to 87222. Andy, what do you think the connection is between America and the UK on this? Do you think that it's essentially influence crossing the pond through social media, or is there something else happening in Western society in general that's leading to this higher anarchic state?
I think across both sides of the Atlantic, there is an ideology within, I would say, left-wing elite classes that doesn't view issues of theft and petty crimes as really a social problem. In fact, some argue that it's a form of social justice. And as I stated just earlier, the impact on low-income, sometimes immigrant communities, working-class communities, is very devastating. And Co-op has already stated that if the shoplifting and thefts keep happening, it may lead to some of these no-go zones. Well, in the US, we do have these no-go zones for some of these grocery stores. They're called food deserts. You can go to some parts of America, in some cities, and you can go for miles, and there will literally be no grocery store where families can access fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy, meat. And it also, that leads to huge health and consequences, further social inequities as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty terrifying picture when you look at some of the things that are posted on social media from America. The amount of shoplifting, looting, definitely becoming more fashionable, one could argue.